My name is Meghann Reeves. I'm an attorney here in Dallas with the firm Husch Blackwell, and I'm thrilled today that you are joining us for the next installment of the Living Legends series with the Dallas Bar Association. I have the privilege today to interview Charla Aldous. She is someone who needs no introduction. She is a well-regarded and formidable plaintiff's attorney. She has tried over 200 jury trials and secured verdicts that total over $1 billion. Recently, in October 2022, she secured a $21 million verdict, which is the largest medical malpractice verdict in the state of Texas for that year, and the 20th largest verdict overall in the state that year. In the months before the pandemic, she tried 3 cases in 77 days, each obtaining verdicts for her clients that were worth over $30 million. While Charla undeniably is a skilled lawyer in the courtroom, what truly sets her apart is the care and attention that she gives each one of her clients. They are an extension of her family, and that goes beyond the end of their cases. Charla, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
One thing of many that I find inspiring about you is your story of your life and your career. You were not handed things. You did not come from a long line of lawyers, and you had humble beginnings in Sherman, Texas. I know becoming a lawyer was not even initially on your radar until you had a very special, I believe, college professor who shined a light to you on some of the talents that he saw in you that would make a great trial lawyer. Would you tell us about that moment and how it shaped your life and how it has shaped you as a trial attorney today?
I'd be happy to. You know, I was a student at Sherman High School, and starting my sophomore year, I was in the vocational office education program. And I can remember like yesterday, our class had a family lawyer from the Twin City of Sherman, Denison, Texas, come in, it was a female, and talk about family law and what she did and how she tried to help people. And I thought, that's what I want to do. I want to be either a legal secretary or a legal assistant. And I actually realize now that legal assistants engage in the unauthorized practice of law on a daily basis because mine usually does a better job than I do. But nevertheless, I decided that's what I wanted to do. So I went to Grayson County Junior College. My family was not of education. My father had a high school education, my mother an 8th grade education. And so I went to Grayson County Junior College. We called it Harvard on the Hill. And I was enrolled in the vocational program, but I took a core class in history because I've always loved history. And so there's 2 professors that really impacted my life. The history professor, after about 2 or 3 weeks in the class, he came up and said, Charla, you know, where do you want to go to college when you finish your 4-year college? I said, well, I'm in the vocational program. And he goes, well, we need to change that because I really, really think you need to get a 4-year degree. And it is really the first time I had thought maybe I could do that. You know, maybe I could. And he said, what did you make on the ACT or the SAT score? And I said, well, I haven't taken it. True story. So I took the college entrance exam when I was in my first year at junior college. And because of that professor, I applied to Austin College, which was a 4-year college, a great liberal arts college there in my hometown of Sherman. And I got a partial scholarship and went to Austin College. And I was working full-time, obviously, but I had a mentor there, and he was my constitutional law professor. And I took his class, and to this day, he was the hardest professor I've ever had. And I fell in love with the law. I really did. The constitutional law was just phenomenal to me. I loved the class, and Dr. Kenneth Street was his name, and he happened to be my mentor, and we were 3/4 through the semester. It was my junior year, and he called me into his office. Of course, I was scared to death, thinking, oh my gosh, Dr. Street's mad at me about something. And he said, I've said this to very, very few students, and I've been doing this for a long time, but you were born to be a lawyer, and I want to help you do your application to go to law school. And I had never even known a lawyer, except the one that came to my vocational office education class. And I get teary-eyed because Ken Street absolutely changed my life. He believed in me. He helped me fill out the application for colleges. I got into UT and Baylor and SMU. I wanted to go to UT because it was cheaper, but I was married. I got married when I was 17. So I was married, so I went to SMU. And it changed the trajectory of my life. I am so thankful that I had those two people who cared enough to spend the time with me and give me the confidence to realize that I could achieve something that had really never crossed my mind.
Are there other people in your life once you became a lawyer along the way that have also served as mentors and helped change the trajectory of your career?
Yeah, I had my first boss out of law school. I worked for the only job I could find in Sherman. It was with a small firm named Henderson, Bryant and Wolf. And my first boss was a guy named Don Flannery. And if anybody knows Don Flannery, they will chuckle when I say his name, because you talk about something else. He was aggressive, fiery, a very, very difficult boss in some ways, and I say that affectionately because we're friends to this day. But he toughened me up. He really did. He just kind of pushed me, and we only tried one case together, but I really attribute to Don a lot of the somewhat toughness that I acquired once I became a lawyer. And when I was in that firm, they had a deal where if you brought in X amount of money, you could get a bonus. But I didn't have enough work to bring in those billable hours, and so I started doing traffic tickets. And they called me the traffic queen of Grayson County. I could quash anything from Gainesville to Bonham to Paris to Greenville to Grayson County. And I literally did traffic tickets for a while so I could make enough money to get my bonus. But Don Flannery was a great first boss. And when I got the DBA Trial Lawyer of the Year, he introduced me. And he remembered way back when. And I love him for it.
I like that you brought up that story about it's really resourcefulness that you've had, even it seems from you were a first-year lawyer. Is that something that has innately always been a character trait, or something that mentors like that first supervising partner you worked for helped you build?
I think looking back on it now, I have always been pretty driven. I knew I wanted to go to college. I didn't think I could go to a four-year college. I didn't think I could afford it. I didn't really know the steps. But I always wanted to achieve more. I kind of wanted to do more than what I had been raised with. Not financially. I mean, that would have been nice as well, but just to see more of the world, to kind of get out and about and try to make a difference in some small way. And I really didn't have, Don was my first boss, but as a woman, this is 37, 38 years ago, I really didn't have a role model because I was trying cases by myself most of the time and was trying them all in smaller communities. And so I kind of just learned by the seat of my pants, just going and doing it. But I loved, absolutely, Meghann, loved being in the courtroom. The first time I was in the courtroom, I thought, this is the place I belong. People often ask me, why did you feel that way? I've never been nervous in the courtroom, strangely enough, and I was an incredibly shy kid growing up. But I see the courtroom as the great equalizer. It doesn't matter how much money you have. It doesn't matter what your role is in life, what family you were born into. When you come into that courtroom, the scales of justice are equal. And I always loved that concept, that the little guy could take on anybody and they come in as equals in a court of law. And that sounds hokey, but I feel very strongly about it. I see the courtroom as the great equalizer and the jury trial as the way to achieve, really, really achieve justice.
I find it hard to believe that you ever were shy.
Incredibly shy.
Now, did that shyness, was that developed more through your career as a lawyer, that you got beyond that? I
got beyond it a lot during law school. I'm actually still personally a shy person. People will laugh when they hear that, but I am, that's just my nature. My sister's much more outgoing. But I really found myself in the courtroom. I really did. I had a difficult childhood, and the courtroom was a safe place. And there were rules, there were, judges, there were bailiffs. It's always been the place where I felt like I belonged. I really, really, really loved being in trial.
I would like to talk about your career trajectory, because you started out on the defense side and you did that for, I believe, more than a decade. So talk to us about that transition. I know there are lawyers that are going to listen to this interview that may be contemplating similar changes.
I don't regret at all the years I spent as a defense lawyer. It started just because Henderson Bryant Wolf did defense work, and then, I evolved into doing, the way I got into doing medical malpractice is my OBGYN in Sherman, who delivered all 4 of my children in Sherman at the same hospital I was born, strangely enough. He got sued, and this was, 35 years ago. And he said, Charla, I want you to represent me. And I'm like, Dr. Booth, I can't represent you. I don't know anything about medical malpractice law. I don't think I've told you this story or anything. And he said, no, I want you to be my lawyer. And he told his insurance carrier, I want this girl from Sherman to be my lawyer. And they said, I don't think so. But through that, I met the insurance adjuster, medical protective. His name was Dan Marley. He's a dear friend to this day. And I got to know him and the lawyer who was representing Dr. Booth. And Dan Marley said, I want you to start doing my medical malpractice work in the smaller communities. And I'm like, are you kidding me? I could not believe it. I was going to be representing doctors, this kid from the wrong side of the tracks. And I started doing his work, and I loved it. And that's how my career kind of developed into doing medical malpractice defense work. And then I was going to move from Sherman to Dallas. And Dan said, okay, you want to be a big city lawyer now? And I'm like, well, I guess, I don't know. He said, I'm going to give you a case against the meanest son of a bitch in Dallas. And I said, okay, who is that? And he said, Steve Maloof, who I ended up practicing with for a short period of time. I remember this so well. I answered on behalf of 4 pediatricians of the horrible failure diagnosed brain tumor case. And within 10 minutes, I got a fax. This is when we had fax machines, from Steve Maloof noticing all 4 of my clients' depositions. And we just didn't do that in the smaller towns. You pick up the phone, you call somebody, you get dates. And I'm like, holy moly, so this is how they do it in Dallas, huh? So I called Steve Maloof and I said, are you always a jerk? Or, do you try to get along with people on occasion? He said, who is this? I said, I'm Charla from Sherman. And he said, are you a straight shooter? I said, I absolutely am. He said, well, let's try it out and see. I'll withdraw those notices and you get me some dates. And from that day on, he and I got along famously, and that started my practice in Dallas, so to speak. But I loved doing the medical malpractice defense. I did all kinds of defense cases, but what I didn't like is that I could not pick my cases. If the carrier or the client calls and says, I've been sued and I want you to represent me, I didn't get a choice whether I believed in the case or didn't. I had to take it. And my firm at the time, it's now Cooper and Scully, it was Cooper, Aldous and Scully. They had a case out in Wilmington, North Carolina, and it was the first methyl tertiary butyl ether case tried in the country, which is the thing you put in gas to make it high octane, or I can't remember all the details. And Scott Summey at the firm had been working on the case and worked it up for quite some time, and we represented 128 trailer park residents whose underground storage water tank had been, well water, had been contaminated by Conoco with MTBE. And so my partners asked if I would go out and try the case in Wilmington, North Carolina. Well, I'm like, I don't know anything about hydrogeology, I don't know anything about MTBE, but I went out to Wilmington, North Carolina, and we tried that case for a couple of months. And the second day of trial, all of my clients, the trailer park residents, were there in the courtroom. And the second day of trial, they brought me a gold-plated Guardian Angel lapel pin. And they had taken up an offering, so to speak, to buy it. And I thought, oh God, this is why I got a law license. And that was an epiphany for me. It was the time that I thought, okay, I've got my school loans paid off. I really think this is what I want to do. It was great. I'll tell you something really funny that happened in that trial. Do you want to hear it?
Go for it, yes.
we showed up, and there were like 4 of us on the plaintiff's side, and Conoco had a whole army of lawyers. I mean, Ivy League smart. And it was this beautiful, majestic federal courthouse that I can't remember the judge's name. He was a Jimmy Carter appointee, had a bolo tie. And I hadn't told my team I was going to do this, but I thought I'm just going to give it a whirl because I didn't know. I learned the case, just crammed for it in the last 2 weeks before trial. So the judge, we got through with jury selection, and the judge says, counsel, call your first witness. And understand, there were probably 10 lawyers, 15 legal assistants. It was a team on that side of the courtroom. So I said, Your Honor, I call whomever on behalf of 𝐏𝐿𝐿 is going to tell this jury if they accept responsibility for polluting my client's well water. It's water in North Carolina, not water. It was, Meghann, the funniest thing. They start standing up, those seersucker suits were going up and down, converging, talking, hovering, and I'm looking at them, and the jury's looking at them. And when the lead lawyer stepped and said, Your Honor, could we get a name? I said, Judge, I don't care who it is. Anybody on that side of the courtroom. This case has been going on for 1.5 years. I just want whoever's going to tell this jury if they're going to take responsibility for polluting my client's well water. It was hilarious. And the judge said, well, she has a point, counsel. Why don't you just put somebody up there? So they called the vice president of the East Coast Division was our first witness. And I couldn't tell if he was a Gila monster or an iguana. He was just very reptilian in his appearance. And I had him on the stand for 2 days, and he didn't know much about the case, but we had the documents and everything. And I just thought, this is what I want to do. I want to be on the plaintiff's side, so I'm proactive as opposed to, defending things. And we ended up getting a verdict in that case, and while the jury was out on punitive damages, we settled it. And that's kind of was when I decided I wanted to make a change.
And one thing I believe that makes you an incredible plaintiff's lawyer is just like that story you told, you aren't afraid to ruffle feathers. And you are fearless, and you're not afraid of the response from the other side.
No, and you've got to be that way. I always say you want the jury to look like they're watching a tennis match or a ping pong table match going back and forth. But you want it to be fun and interactive. And a lot of lawyers, young lawyers especially, everybody's young to me anymore, but they say, what makes a great lawyer? And I said, an authentic lawyer. Be yourself. Don't try to be somebody else. And juries like that. They like lawyers who show their humanity. I can be very self-deprecating, and I don't care if I look like a fool. If it's going to help my client and help me win the case, then let's go for it. But yeah, you got to be kind of fearless, and think outside the box. I often do. I don't like to do CLEs, but I do speeches occasionally, and I always say, one thing you need to do is catch them off guard and think outside the box. And that's kind of what I did just instinctively in the 𝐏𝐿𝐿 case. I had a case, a defamation case, where I was representing a doctor that I loved, but he just was a horrible witness, and I wasn't going to make him a good witness. And the defense lawyer was cross-examining the heck out of him, and this is in Judge Solis's court. I rest his soul in peace. I loved that man. And the doctor was going on and on, not answering the questions, and it was getting worse and worse. And I finally stood up and said, Your Honor, can I object to my client? And Judge Solis said, well, I guess so. I said, I object, non-responsive, hush. So the rest of the examination, he would start talking, and I'd start easing up in my seat, and the jury would look at me and like, ooh, you're about to get in trouble. So it really kind of deflected how horrible his testimony was. It wasn't horrible, it just wasn't delivered real well. Kind of deflected that, so it made it a little bit more of entertainment. So it's always fun to catch them off guard. Now, sometimes you get called down by a judge, but sorry for the judges listening. I always say, take your toothbrush. If you don't get threatened at least one time, you're not new at your job.
Easier to ask for an apology than for permission sometimes. So that leads to one thing I have noticed with a lot of your cases is thinking outside the box, being creative, and that you're a great storyteller, which I think is a huge differentiator between a good trial lawyer and a great one. So what skills have you helped to develop over your career to help you tell those stories?
I've read a lot of books about it, and I always try to remember that I'm just talking to average people, and people love stories, and they like stories that develop and the way you frame a story. I'll give you an example. There's a book that I recommend every young lawyer read, and it's by Mark Mandel. He's a great plaintiff's lawyer out of Rhode Island, a dear friend. And it's on a case framing, and you can get it on the AAJ website, and I think maybe Trial Guides. But it talks about framing a case, and he's got another book called Advanced Case Framing. And so when you tell the story, I don't think you always start with a chronological story, which is what people, I think lawyers often think, let's start at the beginning and go to the end. You've got to tell the story in a way you're going to grip the jury and have them feel what your clients felt while the story progressed. And you've also got to frame it in a way that they are going to think they are being unreasonable if they don't answer on behalf of your client. I firmly believe that when you're communicating with juries, that the fight or flight syndrome is there. And you've heard about the books of the reptile and things like that. And in what I do, which is mostly personal injury, I do some business, but I don't really like it. I do mostly personal injury, is the jury is going to need to think that but for finding for my client, either they are a close family member or friend or in imminent danger, at risk for imminent danger. And so you have to frame the case in a way that they understand that. And you and I visited earlier about a dram shop case that I tried in 2019, and represented a mother of he was a Dallas Cowboy player and died when his best friend crashed a car. It was just so very, very sad. And the case was, against the bar, where we believe the driver was overserved. There was video of him at the bar, and he was not just falling down drunk. There was evidence that he had consumed a lot of alcohol, but he didn't look obviously intoxicated, which was the standard that we have in dram shop cases. And we even had a video of him leaving the bar where construction had been done in the parking lot, and he was driving. 6 minutes after he left the bar, he flipped his car. It was a one-car collision. The police officers that we deposed and had interviewed before we deposed them said that the driver of the car was so intoxicated when they arrived at the scene that if he had tried to leave, they would have arrested him. And we obviously asked the standard, so was he obviously intoxicated at that point in time? And they said yes. So we framed the case a little differently. We didn't start with where our client and the driver had been that evening, where they'd gone, what they drank, the videos that showed they were drinking, any of that. We started the trial with our first witness being the police officer at the scene of the accident. And the reason we did is we wanted the jury to see that obviously this driver had to have been intoxicated when he left the bar, because he was so intoxicated 6 minutes later, the police officer would have taken him to jail had he tried to leave the scene. So I think it's really important how you frame the case. And with a jury, when you're telling the story, do it in a way that you frame the case where they feel what you're feeling and see what the outcome is, and they almost feel like they're being unreasonable if they don't find in your favor.
I'd like for you to also share how you thought through, and especially outside the box, on your Honda seatbelt case. That I believe was also tried around the same time as the dram shop, because as a defense attorney, I see those facts where one of them is that the female passenger that was injured, she put her seatbelt on wrong, and that seems to, and she had been drinking some earlier that day, and those seem like killer facts for a defense attorney. So how do you flip that around and convince the jury that there's more to it than just those two facts?
Well, that case, and it's been publicized, so I can say her name, I represented Sarah Milburn, and the case and the client has a special place in my heart for many reasons. Her dad coached my two sons. I've got 4 kids in soccer when they were little. Sarah played on a basketball team with my daughter, my youngest daughter, in high school, so I had known the family for a long time. And they contacted me, and we first sued Uber because the driver who caused the wreck was an Uber driver, and we settled with Uber for a confidential amount. And I can't take all the credit for this. I contacted my dear friend Jim Mitchell, who does a lot of auto defect cases, because I had never done an auto defect case before, and said, okay, Jim, you got to help me and see if we can figure out a case. And what was interesting about Sarah's case, interesting and sad, is that it wasn't the way the seatbelt was manufactured that was defective. We made it into a human factors case. And I have to be a little careful what I say about this case, as it's currently before the Texas Supreme Court. So I want to be gentle with my words. But our allegation in that case was the way the seatbelt was installed was a way that the common user would not understand how to properly use it. And I'd never heard of these seatbelts before. It was in a Honda, I can't remember the exact name of the car, but it was a Honda SUV. And they have the third back seat. And if you happen to be sitting in the back seat in the middle of that seat, which rarely people are, the seatbelt was anchored in the ceiling. And you would have to pull the seatbelt down, and what you're supposed to do is anchor it here to your right and then pull the lap band over and anchor it. Well, the average user is not going to understand that. There was a little bitty tag on it that showed how to do it. What do we do? What does our memory muscle tell? We take a seatbelt and we pull it over. Well, that's exactly what Sarah Milburn did. She was not intoxicated, not that it matters. She got an Uber, she did the responsible thing, but she had been out celebrating with some of her friends because she was about to graduate from college and start her career. And she happened to get in the car and she got in the back seat in the middle. She was the only one other than the driver that had her seatbelt on. She pulled it up and pulled it over, as one would think you would do, and thought she had buckled in. The driver, it was disputed as to what actually caused the wreck, whether he did not yield to a red light. Anyway, nevertheless, there was a collision. It was not a big impact, but the minivan flipped. And it flipped over. Every other passenger in that car walked out except for Sarah. But she was hung by her seatbelt, and she's a quadriplegic. So because she tried to do the right thing and buckle up, but didn't do it in this funky way that the little tag said you're supposed to do it, you know, it completely changed her life with devastating consequences. And we did a human factor study where we had, I can't remember the number of people, about 60 people come in. Our expert conducted it and had them in the same scenario get in the back seat and put their seatbelt on. And I can't remember exactly how many people we used, but let's say it was 58 of them put it on the exact same way Sarah did. And so our position was, you know, this seatbelt is dangerous in the way you are using it. You need to anchor it in the seat like most seatbelts are, so you know what you're supposed to do when you put it on. So it was a different type of a products case. I was really, really glad Honda fought us hard on that case. And I was just glad that the jury saw it for what it was. I firmly believe that it will. I've noticed there are other cars that on the third row, they have those seatbelts, and I think they're extremely dangerous. So I don't know what the Texas Supreme Court's going to do with that case. My hope is that it will effectuate change.
And these are just two really great examples from your career to show the lawyers listening that simply because at first glance it looks like an uphill battle, that there is always a solution, especially when you think out of the box and be creative on how you can present your theory.
Absolutely, Meghann. I've had a lot of people say, why do you try so many cases? And I said, well, when they offer you nothing, you can't fall out of the basement. I have a tendency to take difficult cases. I look at the circumstances and I do a gut check and say, is this right or is it wrong? And not is it a lucrative case or is it not? It's more to me is there a right and a wrong here, and is there something that needs to change? And usually I think if you use that as your moral compass, you get a case and you believe in it, and you can end up finding the experts. I never try to find experts to make a case, but I try to get them to confirm what I believe, that there was something that was done that was wrong here, and my clients are entitled to justice. So yeah, I take cases that other people would not look at, but I see it as a challenge, and I see it for using my law license for the right reason, and that is fighting for those that, but for me, wouldn't have a voice.
And for those defendants that do come to the table with more money, I know we've talked about before that you have to balance your fearlessness and your ego on how you advise your client. What recommendations do you have for lawyers who are faced with, they're very passionate about the cause they're pursuing for their client on this, but at the same time, there's real money here on the table. How do you make that call?
Yeah, that is, I got back from Houston at 11 o'clock last night in a mediation, and I had to do that very thing. It was a medical malpractice case. We ended up settling it. And the trial lawyer part of me wanted to try it. You know, I wanted to go show them. But I represented the family who has a little baby who's brain damaged and needs care for the rest of his life. And I've never had a case like that yet, thank God, that I have taken it to trial and gotten less, you know, than what was offered. And I would just be devastated if I did. So you've heard the old adage, verdicts feed egos, settlements feed families. That's true. You've got to know when to hold them and when to fold them. And I always hope and pray that I never let my ego or desire to go fight and win overcome what is best for my clients. The cases that are the most difficult are the cases where clients need care. like the Honda case, I couldn't fall out of the basement. They offer you nothing, you go try it. But that case, if they had offered really good money, it would have been hard because Sarah Milburn, we'd gotten her money with Uber, but Sarah needed the care. But when you have a client, especially the babies that in the families I represent that have babies that are brain damaged, you're looking at, these parents are thinking, my child's going to have care for the rest of their life. What's going to happen when I die? Is there going to be enough money there to take care of them? So you really have to have a gut check and an ego check that this is not about you. I will have other cases. My client most likely will not. This is their one and only case. And a lot of people ask me sometimes, what is your favorite case? And I always say the one I'm working on right now. But it's tough. I tell you, it used to, when I first started out, was praying the phone would ring and I'd have a settlement offer. I would sit there, I cannot think about the need to make payroll versus take this settlement. Those are the good old days when you're like, oh my God, I need this money so bad. But you always, always, always have to put the client first.
I think that's a good segue to talk about your firm. Unlike many other firms, especially I would think in the plaintiff's field, purposely take on cases that you call cause cases that are pro bono, or either will have no collectability even if you get a judgment against that defendant. Tell us more about why that is important for you and your firm to take on cases like that.
It's very important. I believe that I've been blessed beyond belief for many years. I've been a single mom. I've been able to educate my kids, and lived a life that I had never dreamt possible. And I think it is our duty as plaintiffs' lawyers, as all lawyers, quite frankly, to give back. And sometimes that's by way of taking a case that's completely pro bono. Sometimes it's taking a case that you're seeking money damages knowing you're never going to collect it. I can give you an example. In 2018, in December of 2018 through 2019, right before COVID, we actually tried 4 cases to a verdict. And it started with a dram shop case, and then we tried a wrongful death case against Greyhound. We tried the Honda products case, and we ended it with a sexual assault case. And so that's a broad spectrum. You never get bored. You're always learning new things. In the sexual assault case we took, we represented it, and it's been in the paper, so I can say her name, a little girl named Isabella Fletcher. And when she was 14, she went to a school party for the football team, and had become intoxicated and I think drugged actually, and was raped by 3 football players. And they were obviously, the boys were somewhat intoxicated as well, and it devastated this child's life. I mean, it was just horrific, and the family came to us and said, what can you do to help us? And so I filed suit against the 3 rapists. I took the deposition of 2, and they were absolutely sorrowful, repentant, really felt bad. And I'm not going to go into the criminal case and why they weren't indicted, which I think is a whole nother story. And we dismissed the case against 2 of them because I thought they were kids that really had learned their lesson and made a huge mistake. But there was this one kid that was just belligerent and unrepentant and just horrible. And we actually, knowing we'd never collect a dime, we tried that case. And we tried it to a verdict. And we got a judgment against him, and we'll never collect a dime. But I did that because I thought this young woman needed a voice. She needed to know somebody believed in her. And other victims of sexual assault out there need to know their lawyers that will stand up even if there's no money involved and try to do the right thing. And the beautiful thing about that story is I called her Ellie. I called her my little porcupine because she was real prickly on the outside but soft on the inside. And she had never really broke down since I'd known her, very, very troubled. And when the jury came back, it was in Denton County. I can't remember what the verdict was. The money was insignificant. It was over $20 million, but and found unanimously in Ellie's favor. She got tears in her eyes, and then the jury went out, and the judge came back in and said, Charla, the jury would like to talk to you and to Ellie. And we walked in that jury room, and when Ellie walked in, they all stood up and clapped for her and said, we so admire your courage. And she started sobbing, and she said, you believed in me, you believed in me, you believed in me. And it was one of the most beautiful, beautiful things. They came up and hugged her, and it changed that child's life. We're still very close. And you know, that's why I get a law license, is to do things like that. And as long as that little punk is alive and I'm alive, he will never own a house because I've got a judgment against him. He will have to learn from that. And you know, the sexual assault cases, I've done quite a few of them. I represented a young woman in the Episcopal School of Dallas case, which was all over the news. I had no clue it would be newsworthy. And she was literally, I didn't know if she was going to kill herself when I first started representing her. To make a long story short, we tried the case, we won, we settled it, and I was at her law school graduation, and then she was married in Florida because her papa, her grandfather, was a retired admiral in the Navy and a retired Episcopal priest. And I flew down to Florida and read the scripture at her wedding. And when I looked from that podium and looked down at my client, I just thought, you know, this is as cool as it gets, because she is thriving. She's a plaintiff's lawyer in San Francisco now. And it's just, it feeds my soul. It really does, to help people like that.
And whenever I came to your office a few weeks ago, you showed me some of the mementos that you have hung up in your office that memorializes some of your other clients. How has that affected you and also your family? Because I know in doing all of those things, whether it be for a client that you're going to be able to secure a huge judgment for, or just a client to make them feel vindicated, how also does your family understand that sacrifice that you make for them?
You know, it was hard. I was a single mom I've been for 27 years, I think now. But it was not easy. My kids sometimes ask me now, they said, "Mom, how did you do it?" Because they're adults. And I said, well, I realized early on I couldn't give you back, and you liked food, shelter, and clothing. True, so there weren't a whole lot of options. But what I would do when I would have to travel, that was before Zoom and everything, for cases, I would take pictures of my clients and put them on a refrigerator door. And sometimes, obviously, the sexual assault cases, I wouldn't get into detail. But I would try to tell my kids what I was doing and who I was fighting for. Not only to let them know my mom was gone on occasion, but also to try to instill in them the understanding that they lived a very blessed life. That tragedy happened, there were people that were less fortunate, and that those people needed a voice. And I think they got it. I really do. They used to ask me, "Mommy, what happened with this person or that person?" So I've always tried to instill that in my kids. Speaking of my kids, I always made them say 3 things to me when I dropped them off at school, and to this day they still laugh at me about it. But I said, you have to say 3 things. I don't care if you're a senior in high school when you walk out the door, or I'm dropping you off in kindergarten. And that's love God, have a good heart, and be happy. And I think sharing with them my experiences with clients helped them in the heart capacity to understand, to be kind and giving, and count your blessings. And then as far as clients go, I always tell them, no matter what happens in your case, when it's over, I want something to remember you by. So when I get tired and I think I don't have any more fights in me, I can look at it. And I've got them all over my office, some of the most meaningful things in the world. One that just popped in my mind, Bob Garrison, it was a failure to diagnose cancer, which took his life. And his wife had been so dependent on him that she'd never even pumped gas. He'd always filled up her car. How nice would that be? Her car with gas. And Bob's main concern was, I want to make sure my wife and my kids, they were older then, but are taken care of. And when he was going through chemo, he had a cowboy hat that he wore, felt a big brown cowboy hat. And he always came to my office and he wore the cowboy hat. We settled the case. It happened to be 3 days before Bob passed away, and he came in to sign the settlement papers, and we got through, and he took the hat off his head and put it on mine. So I have Bob Garrison's hat on a shelf in my office.
That's amazing. Now, I would be remiss if we did not talk about how challenging it can be at times to be a female lawyer, especially when you start out, like you mentioned earlier, when there aren't a whole lot of other female, at least trial lawyers back then, that you can look to as mentors.
It is still, sexism is still alive and well in our profession. There's no question about it. But it is a whole lot better than it was way back when. I did not have any female mentors, partly because there were not any female lawyers in Sherman, Texas, other than me, and that I can recall at that time. There was the family lawyer in Denison, but not in Sherman. But I started out trying cases in the smaller communities, like I said, Paris, Greenville, Gainesville, Bonham, you know, and I can remember like yesterday, I think it was the second case I ever tried was over in Paris, Texas. I'm not going to mention the judge's name, but he was quite a character and quite colorful. And before we started jury selection, he called me back in his office and he goes, "Miss Aldous?" I said, "Yes, Your Honor." He goes, "Are you one of those lady lawyers with a chip on your shoulder?" And I thought, okay, what do? I do what's best for my client. And I said, "Your Honor, I don't think so, but I have a feeling that if I am, you're going to knock it right off." He said, "You damn right I am. Just want to get that clear." That's the kind of stuff we dealt with. And then I'll remember this. This guy was not a sexist. He was just hilarious. A judge over in Denton, Texas. I had 4 children in 6 years, and I would see the judge like once a year or once every 18 months. And I walk in, and I'm pregnant with my second child, getting ready to try a case. And he walks in, and the courtroom was packed. He goes, "My God, Miss Aldous, do you know how this condition happens? You need to come back in my office and let's visit." So it was a lot of the good old boy, you know, network. That case I tried. I thought a juror really, really liked me, and I realized my son John was kicking my dress, so she was smiling every time the baby would kick when I would be in front of her. But no, it was a different world back then. I always just, I tried to use the fact that I was different and, you know, tried to not get angry, kill them with kindness. I loved and still love to be underestimated. It's like, underestimate me, that'll be fun.
What advice do you have for other female trial lawyers that still generally find themselves in a room with all men very frequently?
Don't try to be like a man. I mean, use your femininity, use the fact that you're a woman. I mean, I don't use it in a, you know, overtly gross way, but I don't try to be them. You know, I really try to just be myself and realize I don't have to compete. I don't have to show them that I'm as smart as they are, or I'm as good a lawyer or a better lawyer. I just be myself, and then you just beat them, and then it all works out.
I would love for you to tell your story about the pink and lilac cards from the deposition.
Gosh, this is really funny.
To also give a great example of how when you are in those rooms where you feel that you're being underestimated because you're a young female lawyer, and you're just in a room with a bunch of other male lawyers, and how you can make them feel a little uncomfortable and at the same time show your great skill.
I wish I'd brought my cards. I've been doing this forever. I use cards, and they're not just the typical cards. They're about this yay size, and they're all different colors because it keeps me interested. People often ask if I have a particular organization to the color. No, I just have it's pink, purple, blue, yellow, and green. And I use them for depositions, I use them for trial, because you can, rather than writing on a computer or on a yellow pad, you can reorganize your cards, you know, as people testify and everything. And with juries, it's great because you can look at them and say, I only have 3 more cards, so I'm almost through. Or when you put a card down, they know you're moving to a different subject. But this story is a tad bit manipulative, it really is. But I was going to take an auditor's deposition. It was one of those business cases that I'm not crazy about. And I knew the lawyer on the other side. I really liked him, actually, but he was a little bit of a chauvinist. I wouldn't say misogynist. He was not that way at all, but a little sexism in there. And everybody on his team, they were all males, and you know, starched up in a suit and everything. So I went to that deposition, and the auditor whose deposition I was taking was a male as well. So I just took pink and purple cards, and I took a green Sharpie to write on the cards and to make my notes. And it was truly hilarious. I walk in, introduce myself. I said, okay, let's get going. I pull out my cards. Well, you can see the lawyer on the other side of the table kind of look down like, oh, this is a joke. What is going to happen here? And so I started going through my cards, and the young associates or junior partners, I don't know who they were kind of snickering. It was really funny. And as the deposition went on, it got more and more interesting. And I found out halfway through the deposition, this guy went down to his partner down the hall, who was a dear friend of mine, and said, she's ripping my guy a new asshole, and she's doing it with lilac cards. I thought that was not purple, but lilac. And I just got to tell you, I got the biggest kick out of it because I just knew it would irritate him. This girl comes in with these pink and purple cards and a green Sharpie taking this auditor's deposition. So, you know, it makes it a little more fun. It brings some levity, and you use, you know, what your natural skills are, and you can be a little bit manipulative with it sometimes.
Yeah, I'd really love the advice of leaning in to your femininity, that we do not have to try to be the man in the room. We have our own unique characteristics.
That's exactly right, Megan. We have and be authentic, be yourself. And this is one thing that I do tell, and I love mentoring young female trial lawyers. One thing that I do tell them, and unfortunately this is still true, a female trial lawyer has to earn the right to get angry in the courtroom. And it still to this day just drives me crazy. The man can come in, I mean, blazing, you know, tough cross-examination, really, really aggressive, and the jury's like, oh, that's a great lawyer. A woman does it, and they think, oh, that's you know what? It's automatic. And even to this day, we as female trial lawyers have to earn the right to get aggressive in the courtroom. And by that, you've got to feel it. You always need to remember the jury needs to get mad before you do. Always remember that. And then they'll be on your side. But I have learned through experience that if you go in, because we know what's been going on all throughout the case. We know if the lawyer on the other side is a sexist pig and, you know, has talked down to us and all of that. We know all that. The jury doesn't. And people just don't automatically expect women to be aggressive like that. So if you use it and you ease into it, it can be really to your advantage, because the jury's sitting there thinking, you jerk, you pushed her to this, you know. But that's something that I do tell young female lawyers, even to this day, is you've got to earn the right to be aggressive.
That's great advice. We are taught to be a little more quiet.
Quiet and, you know, the little shrinking violet and all of that kind of stuff. You don't have to be that, you know, shrinking, but you can't be real aggressive from the get-go.
If you could be remembered for one thing, what would it be?
Wow, I wasn't expecting that one. Gosh. You know, when you ask that, it's really crazy. My kids make fun of me. I always read the obituaries in the paper religiously, because I like to look at people's lives and think, were they meaningful? What did they do? You know, and have reflection on my life. What did I do? Let's put my children separate and apart from this, because the thing that I care most about in the world is them. But professionally, what would I want to be remembered for? It's to be a lawyer that was compassionate and truly made a difference. I don't consider what I do as a profession. I really consider it to be a calling. And it's a calling to help those that need me. And I just always say a prayer before I walk into the courtroom and say, you know, God used me and used me for the right reasons. And let me be a voice for my clients, not for myself. And so I'd like to be remembered as a lawyer that made a difference in lives.
Well, I think it's safe to say you have certainly done that, and you have many years left to go.
I don't know about that. I'm a legend now, so that means I can retire.
Thank you again for your time today. I appreciate it so much.
Thank you, Megan.